So this is the last of my Vietnam remembrances, and it ended in Saigon, and it ended in March of 1969 when I had the Cam magazine up and running. We were by then several magazines ahead and locked up, and we may have had several at least. By that time, we were monthly 135,000 circulation. And to review what this was it was essentially an embassy project that came out of the reaction of the Vietnamese population, South Vietnamese population, in the wake of the Tet attacks in January of 1968, which almost had us broken up for a while, running for the coast. I was up in the Trang at the time. I was almost killed. I was pinned down. Shouldn't be here today, but I am. And but then I took the assignment down in Saigon to take over what was essentially an idea for a cultural magazine. U.S. government was doing this in South Korea, Philippines, and Japan, running essentially a cultural magazine for the employees of the U.S. government. And the psychological subtext of this was, we respect your culture, we like you, and it served primarily that purpose. And I was recruited to get the South Vietnam cultural iteration, if you will, up on its feet. And I took over doing that in the summer, roughly late summer, early summer, sometime in the summer of 1968, with a staff of 10 Vietnamese who I could hire and did hire. I think I had 4 enlisted men who assist me, including a staff sergeant, great guy, very fond of him. A fellow named Oscar Luria, and I hope Oscar is still around because I was very fond of him and had a lot of respect for him. So we were set up in the Saigon rail yards, hosted by the 4th Psychological Operations Group. I was recruited primarily because I was a captain by then. I'd been in the field by then. I'd been through stuff, and I'd also been running previously the intelligence section for about a third of South Vietnam, called 2 Corps, for psychological operations out of Nha Trang. So in the view of others, at least, maybe not in my view, I had a pretty good take, or maybe a better take than most people on the situation. And the issue in the late spring and early summer of 1968 was that I was getting ready to go home shortly, and I was certainly getting ready to get out of the Army and get on with the rest of my life. I'm not a career guy, even though by the time I was, believe it or not, I was on the majors list. Promotions came very quickly during that period of time. But they wanted this magazine very badly. They wanted 10,000 monthly quickly. It was set up at the Printing and Publication Center to do it. 2 editions, a black and white edition, and then a full color edition in Vietnamese language. And the ratio there was 10 Vietnamese color magazines to 1 black and white in English. Not a problem. We got it running at 10,000. I think we took it up to 80,000. And then probably by the end of 1968, I had it up to 135,000 countrywide circulation. Now, how's a guy do that? Well, if you have the backing, and if this is what the important people want, then they give you the money, they give you the background, and if you're the right guy, essentially it's a classic get good people and get out of their way. And I know how to do this, and I did it. By Christmas 1968, we were humming along. And into that mix, I got a call on a really sweaty, hot Vietnamese day. I think it was 105, 110 in Vietnam, in Saigon that day, and told to go home. My mother was dying, and I needed to be there. And so I flew home to St. Louis, where it was 10 below. And I remember flying into Seattle or out of Seattle sometime later that next day or whenever, and saying, well, I can always jolly my mother along, and she may be dying, and she may be, but I kind of don't believe it. And I kind of think, well, when we sit down and talk and have a little talk and so forth, I never spoke to her again. She was already unconscious, and I was wrong. The night I arrived, which is the Friday night in St. Louis, my brother picked me up, and we went over to his house, and I was exhausted. And he said, no, we need to take you to the hospital right now to see her. And so we did, and then I didn't leave her bedside until Monday afternoon when she did die. And it was very hard to not see the stark contrast coming from 105, 110 in Saigon to, I think it was 10 below in St. Louis when I arrived. And I also observed that this one death, almost exactly half a world away from where I was in Saigon, was monumentally important. And I came from wholesale death, where 200 people Americans were being killed a week, and so on. In any case, I didn't have to go back to Saigon. I didn't have to resume on the magazine. But before I left, I told them, no, I want to come back. I need a couple of more months here to really get it on a firm footing. And I'm scheduled to leave in April anyway. So I went back and got it on I just smoothed out things. So it was running very smoothly, and handed it off to a lieutenant who was on his way to becoming captain himself, who actually had run newspapers up in the north central United States. So he was a seasoned guy also, although he was new in the country, and he took over and by all accounts did a fine job with it. And March came, scheduled to go home in April, and they came, tapped me on the shoulder and said, if you want to go home now, we've hit 565,000 in Vietnam, in American troops in Vietnam, and we're beginning to back it off. So here's a pile of money, and which I had gotten by saving virtually everything I could on my salary, which was about $12,000 in those days, I think, as a captain. And if you left your money with the government in Vietnam in those days, they'd give you 10%. 10 freaking percent. So when I came back, I had a pile, not a huge pile, but a reasonably good pile of money. And for a variety of decisions, I set out to find and buy a newspaper with training wheels, something really small that I could, because I knew nothing about business at that point, knew how to run things. And because I was one of the beloved guys who'd gotten a master's at the University of Missouri, which was Mecca in journalism in those days, I simply flicked up the phone and called one of my professors, a fellow who was Bill Bray. As a matter of fact, Bill was the head of the Missouri Press Association, but I'd also taken a class or two of his, and said, Mr. Bray, I want to buy a newspaper. And he said, well, you can make as much as you want to, but one of our stars, you can go out. He said, but I said, but I think I should go out and own and run a newspaper and understand the business side of the newspaper. And give it a couple of years, and maybe make a few bucks, sell it maybe for a little more I bought it for, and then go into things. So then Bill called the largest and most important newspaper broker in the country, a guy by the name Bob Belitho, and Bob took me under his wing, and we'll tell that story some other time. The last month or so that I was in Saigon and in Vietnam, I had intended to go up country and visit a couple of places I hadn't been before. I was going to go to Hue, probably go back to all these places where nobody could get to, but I could get to. But in those last weeks, I became really paranoid, badly paranoid, and very much, I guess, afraid. Because I'd now been in country almost more than a year and a half, and in and out and safely, and but now I was going home and I'm not coming back. And so in any case, I just sat in my room in the Splendid Hotel and did very little for my last weeks in Vietnam. And then Sergeant Luria, the afternoon I was leaving, they threw a party for me out back of our Quonset hut, our offices in Saigon Rail Yard, tall cab offices, and everybody came, and we drank beer. It was maybe Saturday afternoon, I don't remember. But they gave me a gift or two, and it was nice, nice enough. And we got our picture taken with everybody, and then Sergeant Luria said, "I'm going to take you out to Benoit myself." And he went and got my Jeep. He put my stuff in the Jeep, and he drove me out to Benoit, which normally they just throw you on a bus and you're gone. That's it. And in one of the most touching, important moments, ending my career, almost ending my career in the Army, the sergeant got out. He took my bags out, put them on the ground, and then he came to attention, and he saluted me. And I'll never forget that. It was at that point that I knew that the sergeant had not just been, giving us what we used to call the Grove Sun salute, which is, but really was, he had respect for me. And taking me out to Benoit in my own Jeep and getting out and saluting me and shaking hands with me, I've never forgotten that. I've been very moved by that. And that afternoon, I went on into the center there, where they kind of process you out a little bit. And I remember I got very drunk. I just started drinking, and I was just kind of an emotional mess, because at that point I realized I'm going to live. I'm going home, and my mother's dead, my father's dead, my oldest brother's dead, my other sisters are married and they have children. My only other brother is married and has children, and I'm free. It doesn't really matter to anybody. I might care, my sister would come up to, older sister came up to San Francisco when I landed at Travis, and picked me up, took me down to LA, and so on. But by all accounts, I was not good shape at this point, and kind of, you go, whew, it's really over. And when I settled, got finally on that plane that afternoon, lifting off at Benoit, and I remember being very apprehensive that somebody would put a round into the bottom of the airplane as we went. And we climbed out, and then I looked out the window, and here came the South China Sea and the coast of South Vietnam. And as we passed over, the whole plane erupted in applause, in cheers, and so on. And I thought, I'm going home. I'm really going home. And many hours later, after a stop, probably in Hawaii, maybe somewhere else, I don't recall, And early Sunday morning, we came sweeping over the beautiful rich lands outside Sacramento, California, as we were in final approach into Travis. And I still break down at the thought. What a beautiful country it is. I'd been given the Bronze Star. I'd been managed to make a few bucks, not more than a few bucks. But most of all, I had made a deal way back there in college to become a ROTC and become an officer. And it never occurred to me not to break that agreement and not to go wherever they wanted to send me, which was, in this case, Vietnam. I later knew people who went to Canada, and that bothered me for a while. And then later on, I finally, some years later, said, "Nah, I'm glad I went to Canada because they did not see what I saw, and that did not become hardwired into them as it is into me." And it all appeared to be senseless anyway. Although later I would decide that by holding a virulent North Communist at bay, we had essentially softened Vietnam. And of course today we're back in Cam Bay and we're wearing shoes that are made in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese people, I've been back 3 times now, they really love us because we fathered a lot of them, just like the French did. And so that night I walked over to the Officers Club at, I should know where we were, but anyway, it was in outside San Francisco. Went in the Officers Club, needed a few bucks, and handed the bartender, somebody a check, and they said, "Well, are you getting out of the Army?" I said, "Yeah, I'm getting out tomorrow." And he said, "We're not going to cash your check." And I smiled then and I laughed now, because as an officer and a gentleman, your word was good. You could go anywhere you wanted in the military, and what you said, they would accept, and they certainly would accept your check and they would pay. But that night in outside San Francisco, they wouldn't take my check. And at that point, that's the point at which I really felt that I was now out of the military and done with the Army, and God love them. The next day I was, and my sister and her three kids and her husband picked me up as I walked out in my uniform. Almost the last time I ever wore that uniform, and in my field jacket, which I still have. I've given the uniform just recently to my nephew, by the way, along with my Bronze Star and all that other stuff, and photos of the night where I got pinned down and all that kind of stuff, all of which is a long time ago, and doesn't seem to bite as much now as it did. And that is 57 years ago when I came home and stepped back into civilian life, which, by the way, was much more difficult than you would think. Living in a war zone is very easy. You may not live the next 30 seconds, and you may not live at all. So life in a war zone when you're in the middle of a war is very binary. It's either life or death. But in living in a civilian United States, you're back into backbiting, slithery behavior, all those things that make mankind not always the nicest people in the world. So I missed for quite a long time living in the war zone and living in Vietnam, and only gradually was able to really come home. But that took a number of years. And this is the last of what we're going to talk about, I think, about Vietnam and about Saigon, and we're going to move on to other stories and other times, some of which will be for Vietnam, but most of which will be after. And stay tuned. Oops. Turn it off, huh?